My cousin stole $175,000 I had saved for my son's surgery and said, "You'll manage without the money," then bought a ticket to the Maldives. Hey everyone, before I get into this, I just want to say that this channel has been struggling lately. Not a lot of people make it to the end of the stories, and it really helps if you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It keeps things going and lets me share more stories like this. Thanks, and now let's get into it. Hi Reddit. I never thought I'd be the type of person to put my life out there like this, but I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know what else to do. My name is Marie, and I'm 34 years old. My life revolves around my son, Nick. He's 7 years old, and he's the best thing that's ever happened to me. He's sweet, kind, and way too smart for his own good. But he was also born with a congenital heart defect, and every single day, I wake up terrified that something will happen to him before I can save him. Nick's condition makes it impossible for him to do the things other kids his age take for granted. He gets winded just walking short distances, he can't run, and playing with other kids is out of the question. He watches from the sidelines as his classmates run around during recess, pretending it doesn't bother him, but I see it in his eyes. He knows he's different. The doctors say surgery is his only real shot at living a normal life. But the problem? It costs $175,000. Even with my insurance, the out-of-pocket expenses are crushing. And I don't have that kind of money. I work as a nurse, and I've been taking as much overtime as possible. I barely sleep anymore, constantly picking up extra shifts, working doubles, and spending every spare moment trying to figure out how to get the money. I started a GoFundMe, but it's been slow, and I hate asking people for help. I've sold everything of value, my jewelry, my car, anything that isn't an absolute necessity. But I'm still nowhere near what I need. I don't have family I can rely on. Or at least, not in the way most people do. My parents and siblings all believe that I brought this on myself. Why? Because Nick's father, Dan, left me when I was pregnant. And according to them, it was my fault. Dan and I were together for 5 years. I loved him with everything I had. And when I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon. But then I found out he was cheating. Not just once, not just a mistake. He had been having an entire relationship behind my back. I confronted him, thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd at least try to fix things for the sake of our baby. But instead, he walked out. No apologies. No guilt. Just packed a bag and left. The worst part? My family took his side. I don't even know how to explain it. My mother told me I should have been more understanding of his needs, that maybe if I had been a better girlfriend, he wouldn't have looked elsewhere. My father said men have urges, and that I should have just let it go. My sister flat out told me that I ruined a good thing by making a big deal out of something that wasn't that serious. Dan moved on, got married a year later, and as far as I know, he's living a perfect little life with his wife and 2 kids. He's never once reached out to see Nick. Never offered a dime in support. Legally, he's on the hook for child support, but enforcing it has been a nightmare. He works under the table now, making it impossible to garnish his wages, and he's hidden his assets so well that even my lawyer says it's like squeezing water from a stone. And my family, they still talk to him. My mother sees his kids and calls them her grandbabies, while Nick, the only actual grandchild she has, is completely ignored. I begged them for help when I found out about Nick's surgery. I wasn't asking for a handout, just a loan, something I could pay back. But they refused. My father said it wasn't his problem. My mother told me I was selfish for expecting them to bail me out of a situation I created. My brother, who just bought a brand new truck and posts about his vacations every other week, claimed he couldn't afford to help. My sister, who has a house 3 times the size of mine, laughed and told me to ask Dan. I've never felt so alone in my life. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I'm exhausted. Every time I leave for work, I worry it'll be the last time I see Nick awake. Every time I get a call from an unknown number, my heart stops, afraid it's the hospital telling me he collapsed. I am barely holding on, and the people who should be in my corner, the people who should care, don't even seem to notice. I don't know what to do anymore. I just want my son to live. Is that really too much to ask? Things were starting to look up, or at least, I thought they were. The fundraising had taken longer than I wanted, and every day I felt the weight of the clock ticking down, but somehow, someway, I had done it. Between the overtime, the selling of everything I owned, the GoFundMe finally gaining traction, and a small grant from a medical assistance program, I had reached the impossible number, $175,000. Every cent had been carefully set aside in a separate savings account, untouched, reserved solely for Nick's surgery. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe. Sophie had been one of the few people in my family I still trusted. She wasn't like the rest of them. At least, I had always believed that. When she broke up with her long-term boyfriend, she moved in with Laura, my older sister, the family's golden child. Laura had always been the perfect one in their eyes, the one who could do no wrong, the one who had their unwavering support no matter what. The two of us had never been close, but Sophie was different. She visited often, always making a point to stop by and see Nick. She played with him, talked to him, made him laugh in a way few people could. She asked about his surgery, about the hospital, the doctors, the costs, the date, everything. And I thought it was just because she cared. I thought she was one of the rare family members who actually gave a damn. I was wrong. The day it happened, I was at work. It had been an exhausting shift, one of those days where the hospital was short-staffed and I barely had a second to sit down. I was in the middle of charting when I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting it to be something minor. But the second I saw the notification from my bank, my blood ran cold. My account had been emptied. All of it. Every last cent of the $175,000 gone. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe a glitch, maybe the bank was flagging something incorrectly. I rushed to the break room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type as I logged into my account. But there it was. The money had been transferred out in one single transaction to an account I didn't recognize. I don't even remember breathing. The room started spinning, my vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of error. There was no way, this was real. I called the bank immediately, my voice frantic, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. The representative on the other end was calm, far too calm, as she explained that the transfer had been authorized from my account using my own credentials. That didn't make sense. I never made that transfer. I demanded they reverse it, get it back, do something. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. The transfer was authorized from a familiar device and location. Do you recognize this name? She read it aloud, and I swear, for a second, I forgot how to breathe. Sophie. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers went numb. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. Sophie? The only person in my family I still trusted? Sophie, who played with Nick, who held my hand when I cried about how scared I was for his surgery. Sophie, who sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee, telling me she wished she could help in some way. I felt like an idiot. Of course she had access. She had been over so many times, using my Wi-Fi, watching me enter my passwords, listening to every detail about the surgery, the money, the exact date I would need it. She had planned this. She had waited, gaining my trust, watching me struggle, watching me break myself to save my son. And then, the second she knew the money was there, she took it all. I called her immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I texted. No response. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand, but I didn't care. I grabbed my bag, stormed out of the hospital, and drove straight to Laura's house. The second I pulled into the driveway, I was out of the car, pounding on the front door so hard I thought it might break. Laura opened it, looking surprised to see me. I need to talk to Sophie, I said, my voice deadly calm, though I could feel the storm raging inside me. Laura hesitated. She's not here. Where is she? Laura shifted uncomfortably. She left this morning. Went on a trip. A trip with my son's surgery money. I don't even remember what I said next. I don't remember what came out of my mouth, but I know I was yelling, I know I was shaking, and I know Laura kept telling me to calm down, as if I was the problem here. As if I was the crazy one for being upset that someone had just stolen my child's chance at life. She said she needed it more than you. Laura finally snapped. You'll figure something out. You always do. I swear. I felt something in me break in that moment. Sophie was gone. My money was gone. And my family. They didn't care. I barely remember driving home. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and fury. My thoughts were racing, colliding into each other so fast I could not hold on to a single one. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eye, listen to me pour my heart out about how terrified I was for Nick, play with him, tell me she cared, only to turn around and steal everything? I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. The bank had already told me that the transfers were authorized from my own account, but I had not made them. There had to be more to it. I rushed inside, went straight to my laptop, and pulled up my transaction history. There it was. A series of transfers leading up to the final withdrawal, all done through my own device, my own Wi-Fi. I felt sick. My stomach twisted into knots as I scrolled through, my hands trembling so badly I could barely move the mouse. That was when I remembered. Sophie had used my laptop. It had seemed innocent at the time. She had mentioned she was looking for jobs, saying she wanted to get back on her feet after her breakup. I had let her use it without a second thought, even giving her the Wi-Fi password, thinking nothing of it. But now I saw it for what it really was. I clicked through my saved logins, my email, my bank settings. She must have watched me enter my credentials. Maybe even reset my passwords when I was not looking. I had been so exhausted, so overwhelmed with work and stress, I had not even noticed anything was off. A sickening realization hit me like a freight train. She had been planning this for months. It was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was not an act of desperation. It was calculated. She waited, she watched, she listened. She gained my trust, played the role of the caring cousin, and the moment she saw her opportunity, she took it. Sat there, staring at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I needed to find her. I needed to see what she had done with my son's surgery money. I opened Instagram, my fingers moving on autopilot. And then, there she was. Sophie, in the Maldives. The first photo showed her reclining in a business-class seat, holding a glass of champagne, a caption underneath that read, "Finally taking the break I deserve." The second was even worse. A shopping spree, designer bags stacked on top of each other, brand names I could barely pronounce, things that cost more than my entire monthly salary. The caption? "Retail therapy is the best therapy." Then came the yacht. A sunset in the background, Sophie laughing, holding another drink, wearing a swimsuit that probably cost more than my rent. The location tag confirmed it. She was not just on some random trip. She was in one of the most expensive destinations in the world. With my son's surgery money, I wanted to throw my laptop across the room. My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. My chest felt tight, my vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out from sheer rage. This was not just betrayal. This was cruelty. I had worked myself into the ground for that money. I had sacrificed sleep, my health, my sanity, everything, to save my son's life. And she had taken it without a second thought, without an ounce of remorse, and used it to fund a luxury vacation. I could feel the scream building in my throat, the overwhelming urge to destroy something, to make her feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. But none of that would help Nick. None of that would get the money back. I needed to be smart. I needed a plan. Because Sophie had stolen from the wrong mother. And I was going to make her pay. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Sophie lounging in luxury, drinking champagne on a yacht while my son lay in his bed, too weak to run or play like the other kids. The rage inside me was unbearable, a constant, burning presence that would not let me rest. But no matter how furious I was, I knew anger alone would not fix this. I needed proof. If there was any way to get that money back, I had to be methodical. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I contacted my bank again, demanding a full record of the transfers, including the IP addresses and locations where they had been made. I was expecting to see Sophie's name, expecting confirmation that she had logged in from my Wi-Fi when she was over. But when I received the records, something else stood out. There were multiple logins from my house at times when I was not home. That made no sense. Sophie had only ever been over when I was there. How could she have accessed my accounts when I was at work? A sick feeling twisted in my gut as I thought back to something Laura had said when I confronted her. She had not been surprised. She had not been outraged. She had defended Sophie. I had been so focused on Sophie that I had overlooked the possibility of a much deeper betrayal. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to clear my head, but before I could take a breath of fresh air, my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, waved me over. She was an older woman, always watching the street from her porch, never missing anything that happened in the neighborhood. "I saw your sister near your house a few times last month," she said casually. "I thought you were home, but I never saw your car." She pulled up in that silver SUV of hers, parked down the street. Seemed strange. I felt my stomach drop. Laura had been near my house on the days of the transfers. I thanked Mrs. Henderson, my mind spinning, my hands clenched so tightly I could feel my nails digging into my palms. I was trying to stay calm, trying to piece everything together logically, but nothing about this felt real. That night, I barely slept again. I kept running through every moment, every interaction, trying to figure out what I had missed. Had Laura been part of this from the start? Had she helped Sophie? The next morning, I took Nick to school, determined to push my suspicions aside for a little while and focus on him. But when I was dropping him off, his teacher, Mrs. Carter, stopped me at the door. "I wanted to follow up about the pickups last month," she said, looking slightly concerned. I frowned. "What pickups?" She hesitated. "Laura picked Nick up from school twice. She brought a note from you both times, so we didn't question it." My blood turned to ice. I never wrote a note. I never asked Laura to pick him up. She had taken my son, without my knowledge, without my permission, while I was at work. I felt dizzy, like the world was tilting beneath me. My head was spinning so fast I could barely think straight. My own sister had impersonated me, forged my signature, and taken Nick out of school. I thanked Mrs. Carter, forcing a smile as I walked away, my entire body numb. I had to know. I had to see the truth for myself. When I got home, I tore my house apart, searching for anything that would confirm what I already knew in my gut. I checked my security system, but the cameras had not been working for months. I had never gotten around to fixing them. My mind raced, trying to think of what else I could check. Then I remembered my laptop. I opened it, my hands shaking, and pulled up the recent activity logs. And there it was. Files accessed at times when I had been at work. Documents related to my finances opened on dates that matched the transactions. Logins made while I was gone. And worse than that, I found security footage from my laptop's webcam. Motion-triggered recordings that I had completely forgotten were even enabled. I played them back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. There, in my house, while I was at work, were Sophie and Laura. Laura, sitting at my desk, my laptop open in front of her. Sophie standing next to her, talking, laughing, like this was all some kind of joke. I could not breathe. I had been robbed. By my own sister. I stared at the screen, my entire body numb, watching the video over and over again. Laura, sitting at my desk, scrolling through my finances. Sophie, standing beside her, laughing, completely at ease in my home, planning how to steal the money I had bled for. The evidence was right in front of me. Undeniable proof that they had done this together. But no matter how much I had suspected, no matter how much I had already pieced together, seeing it made it real in a way that shattered something inside me. I did not wait. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and texted Sophie. I did not waste time with accusations or pleasantries. I sent her the video. Her response came within minutes, so casual, so dismissive, that I thought for a second I was hallucinating. Don't be so dramatic. He's not dying right now. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I read the message again, then again, as if the words might change, as if there was any possible way I had misunderstood them. But no, that was what she had said. My son was not dying right now. As if that justified it. As if that meant she had the right to take the only thing standing between him and a lifetime of suffering. I called her, my hands so tight around the phone that I could feel the plastic casing bend under the pressure. She declined. I called again. No answer. My fingers moved on their own, typing a message so fast I barely registered what I was saying. You stole my son's surgery money. You are a criminal, and I am getting it back. She did not respond. I turned my attention to Laura. She had ignored my messages all day, but I knew where to find her. I barely remember driving to her house. I do not remember parking, do not remember getting out of the car, only the moment when I was standing at her front door, pounding on it so hard that my fists ached. She opened it, looking annoyed, like I was some inconvenience rather than the sister she had just betrayed. You need to fix this, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You and Sophie need to send that money back right now. Laura rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Marie. Can you calm down? You are acting insane. You stole from me. I hissed, barely able to keep my voice steady. You stole from Nick. She crossed her arms, looking at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. It was alone. I felt something inside me snap. Alone. My voice came out strangled, like I could not believe what I was hearing. Alone implies you asked. Alone implies I agreed. You broke into my house, forged my signature, stole my money, and now Sophie is drinking champagne in the Maldives while my son is waiting for heart surgery. Laura let out an irritated sigh, like this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to her. She needed it more than you. I almost laughed. The absurdity of it, the sheer audacity, made my head spin. She needed $175,000 more than a sick child? Laura rolled her eyes again. She was going through a rough time. You do not understand how hard the breakup was for her. You will figure something out, Marie. You always do. I felt like I was going to throw up. This was my sister. The person I had grown up with. The person who should have been in my corner. And she was standing there, defending this. I stepped closer, my voice low and shaking. Give me back my money, or I swear to God, I will go to the police. Something in her expression flickered, just for a moment. Then she let out a small, smug laugh. And tell them what? That your family borrowed from you? That your sister and cousin, who you let into your home, used your own laptop and your own Wi-Fi? Good luck with that, Marie. You are being hysterical, and honestly, it is embarrassing. The words hit me like a slap. Hysterical. That was the word my family always used when they wanted to shut me down. When they wanted to make me feel like I was overreacting, when they wanted to make me question myself. And the worst part? It worked. For a second, just a second, I felt the doubt creep in. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was letting my emotions get the best of me. Maybe there was some kind of explanation I had not considered. Then I saw Nick's face in my mind. 7 years old. Too tired to run. Too weak to play. Looking up at me with trust in his eyes. Believing me when I told him I would take care of him. That I would fight for him. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and met Laura's smug expression with pure steel. I am going to the police, and I am pressing charges. Then I turned around and walked away, leaving her standing there, laughing under her breath like she thought I was bluffing. She had no idea what was coming. I barely made it home before the weight of everything crashed down on me. My hands were still shaking from the confrontation with Laura, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. The smug way she had looked at me, the way she had laughed like I was some kind of joke, burned inside me, twisting into something dark and relentless. I was done being dismissed, done being betrayed, done letting these people ruin my life and steal from my son. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop in front of me, determined to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. If I was going to take legal action, I needed every scrap of evidence possible: bank statements, account logins, financial records, anything that proved what they had done. As I sifted through my emails, something odd caught my eye: an old confirmation email buried under months of unread messages, a hotel reservation in Dan's name. My first thought was that it was irrelevant, just another painful reminder of the man who had abandoned us. But then I saw the date, and my stomach twisted. Curiosity and something far worse clawed at my insides as I pulled the email up, scanning the details. The reservation was for a luxury hotel in the city, a suite, a weekend stay, booked when I was 7 months pregnant. Dan had been cheating on me, that much I had always known. But now, staring at the dates, I realized this was the exact weekend he had told me he was on a work trip. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt, my hands moving on their own as I grabbed the old iPad I had stashed away in a drawer, one of Dan's forgotten possessions that I had never gotten around to getting rid of. It was old, the screen slightly cracked, but it still turned on, and just like I hoped, he had never logged out of his accounts. My fingers shook as I tapped through his photos, scrolling back to the date of the hotel reservation, feeling like I was on the verge of something I could not name, something that was going to make everything worse. And then I saw them. Photos of Dan, kissing Laura. My breath caught in my throat, my vision blurred as I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was looking at. It was not just one photo. It was a collection, each one more damning than the last. Dan with his hands on Laura's waist, Laura leaning into him, her lips on his. A mirror selfie in a hotel bathroom with Laura wrapped in a towel and Dan smirking behind her, dated when I was 7 months pregnant. A choked sound escaped me, something between a gasp and a sob, as the realization hit me like a freight train. My own sister, the same sister who had spent years telling me I had ruined my relationship with Dan, that I had been too demanding, too unforgiving, the same sister who had helped him abandon me, had been sleeping with him behind my back. I felt sick, my stomach twisted so violently I thought I might throw up right there, gripping the edge of the table, forcing myself to breathe, my entire body trembling with rage and something deeper, something I could not even name. And then it hit me. Sophie knew. The way she had manipulated Laura, the way she had so easily convinced her to go along with the theft, the way Laura had looked almost nervous when I threatened to go to the police. She had not been scared of the crime. She had been scared of what Sophie knew. I scrolled back through Dan's old messages, searching for anything that might explain how Sophie had found out. And there it was, a message from Sophie to Laura that made my blood run cold. I wonder how Marie would feel if she knew the truth. If she knew that the sister she trusted was screwing her boyfriend while she was carrying his baby. My breath came out shaky as everything clicked into place, and I realized the full extent of their betrayal. Sophie had blackmailed Laura, using the affair as leverage to get her to help steal from me, knowing that Laura would rather give up the money than let me find out what she had done. That was why Laura had gone along with it. Why she had helped Sophie take everything I had. Why she had defended her so fiercely. Because Sophie had found out about the affair, about how deep Laura's betrayal truly ran, and she had used it against her to get what she wanted. This was never just about money. This was about power, about control, about keeping secrets buried at any cost. I looked down at the iPad, at the damning proof in front of me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled, because now I had everything I needed to bring them both down. I did not give Laura the chance to escape this. The moment I had the proof in my hands, I drove straight to her house, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and something else, something that felt almost like relief. After years of being blamed, dismissed, and cast aside, I finally had something they could not twist against me. This time, there would be no gaslighting, no accusations of me being hysterical, no convincing me that I was exaggerating. This time, the truth was undeniable, and they would all have to face it. Laura opened the door with her usual expression of irritation, as if my presence alone was an inconvenience, but she had no idea what was coming. Without waiting for an invitation, I stepped inside, my hands trembling with the force of holding myself back from screaming. I met her eyes, held out the iPad, and watched as the color drained from her face when she saw what was on the screen. I did not need to say anything at first, because the moment she saw the pictures, she already knew. "You let Sophie steal from me to keep this a secret," I finally said, my voice deadly calm, my hands gripping the iPad so tightly I thought it might snap in half. "Tell me I am wrong." Laura opened her mouth, then closed it, her lips pressing together as if she was searching for something, anything, to say that might undo what was already done. For the first time, she had no smug remarks, no dismissive attitude, no condescending words to make me feel small. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she reached out as if she wanted to take the device from me, but I pulled it back before she could even touch it. "You slept with Dan?" I continued, my voice sharp, unrelenting, refusing to let her run from this. "While I was pregnant with his child. And when Sophie found out, she used it against you to get access to my money." She let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hands, her entire body trembling under the weight of her own guilt. I had never seen Laura cry like this before, not when she was caught in a lie, not when she wanted to manipulate a situation, not when she was trying to twist a story in her favor. But this was different. These were real tears, the kind that only came when a person realized they had just lost everything. "Marie," she whispered, but I did not let her speak. "Say it," I demanded, my voice shaking, not with sadness but with fury, with years of built-up betrayal that I could no longer contain. "Tell me the truth. Tell me it was blackmail." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, her entire body sagging as if she had been carrying this weight for years and could no longer bear it. "Yes," she admitted in a broken whisper. "She found the photos months ago. She told me if I did not help her, she would tell you. She would tell Robert. She would tell everyone." I panicked. I did not know what to do. I thought it was the only way to keep my life from falling apart. Her life. That was all she cared about, the life she had built, the perfect image she had maintained, the reputation she had protected, while I had been struggling, while I had been working myself to the bone, while my son had been waiting for a surgery that could save his life. She had destroyed my life, stolen from my child, helped Sophie take everything I had, and all she cared about was keeping her own secrets buried. I let out a breath, steadying myself, refusing to let her see even a flicker of hesitation in my eyes. "Well, Laura," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "your life is about to fall apart anyway." I did not wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out of the house, hearing her sobs behind me, but feeling nothing but cold determination as I got into my car and drove straight to my parents' house. For years, they had chosen her over me, defended her, protected her, treated me like an afterthought while she got away with everything. But this was one thing they could not excuse. I sent the photos to our family group chat, attaching the bank statements and writing everything out in detail, explaining how Laura had stolen from me, how Sophie had blackmailed her, how they had worked together to take my son's surgery money. I laid it all out for them, every lie, every betrayal, every crime. And then, for the first time in my life, I let go of any need for their approval and blocked them all. I did not need to see their responses. I did not need to hear their excuses. I had said what I needed to say, and now it was their mess to deal with. The fallout was immediate. Laura's perfect image shattered overnight, and the parents who had always stood by her turned their backs on her. They could not spin this. They could not protect her, not when the proof was staring them in the face, not when their neighbors, their friends, their entire social circle now knew what she had done. They begged me to talk, to fix things, to just let it go, but I ignored them because they were no longer my family. And then came the final blow. Robert, Laura's husband, the man she had built her entire life around, the man who had been oblivious to the fact that his wife had been sleeping with her own sister's boyfriend. He found out the way everyone else did, through the messages I had sent. I do not know what their conversation looked like, but I know it ended with him filing for divorce. And then, the one thing I never expected happened. I was at home, exhausted, emotionally drained, trying to figure out how I was still going to get the money for Nick's surgery when I got an alert from my bank. Confused, I opened the app, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the notification. A transfer of $175,000 from Robert. My hands were shaking as I called him, not even sure what I was going to say, but when he answered, he sounded calm, almost resigned. "I am sorry for what she did to you," he said simply. "And I know it does not fix what happened, but Nick deserves that surgery. Take the money. It is yours." I tried to protest, tried to tell him I could not accept it, but he cut me off before I could get the words out. "I have plenty," he said without hesitation. "You need it. And frankly, after everything Laura has put you through, I would rather my money go to you than to her in the divorce." I do not even remember how I thanked him. I only remember hanging up the phone and breaking down in tears, not from pain, not from grief, but from the first real relief I had felt in years. Nick was going to get his surgery, Laura had lost everything, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Sophie had no idea what was waiting for her when she returned. While she was indulging in stolen luxury, sipping champagne on yachts, and parading around in designer clothes, I had made sure that every step she took from that moment forward would lead her straight to her downfall. The moment I had the evidence in my hands, I had gone to the police, determined to make sure she faced real consequences for what she had done. I spent hours at the station providing every detail, showing them the financial records, the proof that the transfers had come from my own laptop, my own Wi-Fi, under my own credentials, all while I had been at work. I walked them through every bank statement, every suspicious login, and every message proving that Sophie had manipulated Laura into helping her commit fraud. When I left that station, I did not feel guilt or fear, only the overwhelming weight of justice finally catching up to her. It did not take long for law enforcement to build a case against her. Financial crimes leave a trail, and despite Sophie's arrogance, she had been careless. She had thought that making the transfers through my accounts would make them harder to trace back to her, but in reality, it only made it easier. They issued a warrant for her arrest while she was still overseas, and from that moment on, there was nothing she could do about it. By the time she landed back in the United States, completely unaware of what was waiting for her, she barely made it through the airport terminal before she was surrounded by law enforcement. I was not there to see it, but I heard about it almost immediately. News spread quickly in my family, though no one dared to contact me directly anymore. Instead, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Sophie had been completely blindsided, screaming about how this had to be some kind of mistake, insisting that I was being dramatic, that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. She had been so confident, so convinced that she was untouchable, that it had never occurred to her that actions have consequences. The fallout was instant and brutal. Her parents, who had always excused her behavior, who had enabled her selfishness for years, finally realized that this was beyond saving. She had not just stolen money, she had stolen from family, and in their world, that was an unforgivable betrayal. They publicly disowned her, cutting off all financial support, refusing to visit her, refusing to answer her calls, leaving her completely alone while she sat in a holding cell waiting for her court hearing. I never expected anything from them, never cared what they thought, but then, out of nowhere, I received a call from a lawyer representing her parents. They wanted to settle. They wanted this nightmare to go away as quickly and quietly as possible, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal Sophie had created. They could not undo what she had done, but they could try to repair the damage she had left in her wake. Through their lawyer, they offered me $140,000, not as restitution for the crime, but as an apology, an acknowledgement that I had been wronged. I took the money without hesitation. Nick's surgery was already covered thanks to Robert's generosity, but this money would secure his future. Every penny of it went into a trust, ensuring that no matter what happened, my son would always be taken care of. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had not known in a long time: peace. Sophie's case moved through the court system faster than I had expected, and when the day of her sentencing arrived, she took a plea deal rather than drag the case into a full trial. She avoided prison, but she did not walk away unscathed. She received a suspended sentence, hundreds of hours of community service, and, perhaps the most satisfying consequence of all, she lost any chance of ever obtaining a medical license. That had been her dream, the one thing she had always claimed she was working toward, the goal she had used to justify her selfishness. But with a fraud conviction on her record, no medical board would ever approve her. I never spoke to her again. I never spoke to any of them again. Laura lost everything in her divorce, abandoned by the family who had once worshipped her. My parents, who had spent years turning their backs on me, now had to live with the disgrace of what their golden child had done. Sophie, who had once believed she was smarter than everyone else, who had manipulated and stolen without a second thought, now had nothing. Nick got his surgery. He got his future. And I finally got my justice. Laura had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, the one who was showered with praise and admiration no matter what she did. She had spent her entire life being adored, protected, and excused, while I had been pushed aside, dismissed, and blamed for every wrong that had ever occurred. But life has a way of balancing the scales, and when her world finally collapsed, there was no one left to catch her. She lost Robert almost immediately. The moment he saw the undeniable proof of her betrayal, of the affair she had tried so desperately to keep hidden, there was no discussion, no chance for redemption, no desperate attempt to save their marriage. He filed for divorce without hesitation, cutting her off from the life she had built on deceit. It was not just the marriage she lost, it was her stability, her home, her reputation, and most painfully of all, her children. Robert fought for full custody, and he won. The court had no sympathy for her, not after the fraud, not after the lies, not after the proof that she had stolen from her own family. He moved out of state, taking the children with him, ensuring that Laura would have nothing but the distant knowledge that she had destroyed her own family with her selfishness. I did not know if she even tried to fight for visitation, and frankly, I did not care. That part of my life, that part of my family, no longer existed to me. But the destruction did not stop there. Her career, once thriving, once a source of pride that she lorded over everyone, began to crumble beneath her. She had been respected, admired in her field, but scandals follow people like shadows, and whispers of what she had done spread faster than she could contain them. Colleagues who had once spoken highly of her now kept their distance. Opportunities that had once been easily within her grasp began to slip away. Hospitals and private practices no longer saw her as the rising star she had once been, but as a liability, a person whose personal life was too messy, too chaotic, too untrustworthy to be taken seriously. She lost her prestigious position at a well-known clinic, forced to take a lower-paying, less stable job just to keep herself afloat. She had to move out of the lavish home she had once shared with Robert and their children, downsizing to a small apartment that was a far cry from the life of comfort she had always known. For the first time in her life, there was no one there to protect her, no one there to shield her from the consequences of her own actions. And then, after everything, after years of betrayal, after watching my son nearly lose his chance at a future because of her selfishness, she had the audacity to try to reach out to me. I received the first message months after everything had fallen apart, a short, pitiful attempt at an apology that did not even begin to acknowledge the depth of what she had done. She did not say she was sorry for stealing from me, for helping Sophie ruin my life, for taking what should have gone to Nick, for all the years of cruelty she had inflicted. Instead, she talked about how hard things had been for her, how she had lost so much, how she just wanted to talk. I deleted the message without responding. The call started after that, numbers I did not recognize but knew belonged to her. I never answered. Then came the final, desperate attempt. One day, I found her standing outside my apartment, waiting for me when I got home from work. She looked different, smaller somehow, as if the weight of her actions had finally started to wear her down. Her once perfect hair was unkempt, her clothes not quite as put together as they used to be, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in her eyes, no superiority, just something that almost resembled regret. I stood there, keys in my hand, watching as she opened her mouth, as if she had rehearsed what she was going to say 1,000 times. But before she could get a single word out, I shook my head, turned away, and walked inside without ever looking back. Laura had made her choices, and she had to live with them. She was nothing to me now. The day of Nick's surgery was the longest day of my life. I had spent years fighting, breaking myself apart, doing everything in my power to make sure this moment would come, and yet, as I sat in the hospital waiting room, hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles turned white, I felt a fear unlike anything I had ever known. I had spent so much time focused on getting the money, on making sure he had this chance, that I had barely let myself think about what would come next. But now, there was nothing left to do but wait. Nothing left to focus on but the fact that my son was on an operating table, his tiny heart in the hands of a surgeon, and all I could do was pray that I had not come this far just to lose him. The hours dragged on endlessly, each second stretching longer than the last, my mind replaying every moment that had led us here, from the desperation of working endless shifts, to the betrayal of the people I had once trusted, to the unimaginable kindness of Robert, who had given me the means to save my son when my own family had failed me. I had spent so long fighting against the impossible, and now, for the first time, I had no control over what happened next. When the surgeon finally walked into the waiting room, still dressed in scrubs, exhaustion clear in his expression, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, everything around me fading into a dull hum as I braced myself for whatever he was about to say. But then he smiled. "The surgery was a success," he said, his voice calm, steady, the kind of voice that had delivered news like this countless times before. But to me, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Nick is going to be just fine." The air rushed from my lungs in a broken sob, my entire body trembling as relief crashed over me, so hard I could barely breathe. For the first time in years, the weight that had been crushing me, the fear that had followed me through every waking moment, finally lifted. My son was safe. My son was going to live. The days that followed felt surreal, as if I were waking up from a nightmare I had been trapped in for far too long. Watching Nick open his eyes, seeing the color return to his cheeks, Hearing the excitement in his voice as he asked when he could get up and play filled me with a kind of happiness I had almost forgotten was possible. And when he finally took those first unsteady steps out of bed, walking without the exhaustion that had always weighed him down, I knew that everything I had fought for had been worth it. The first time he ran, really ran, without stopping, without gasping for breath, without clutching his chest in pain, I cried so hard I thought I might never stop. He laughed as he turned to me, his smile wide and full of life, his arms spread out as if he were flying. And in that moment, I knew we had made it. The worst was behind us, and for the first time in a long time, the future was something I could look forward to instead of fear. The people who had once condemned me, who had turned their backs on me, who had blamed me for the choices that had not been mine to make, began to reach out. My parents, who had always favored Laura, who had always dismissed my struggles, suddenly saw me in a different light. Maybe it was the guilt of knowing they had defended the wrong daughter. Maybe it was the shame of realizing they had abandoned their real grandchild while Laura had betrayed them all. Or maybe it was just the unavoidable truth that they could no longer pretend they had been right. They tried to make amends, tried to offer apologies wrapped in half-hearted justifications, but I did not need their words. I had spent my entire life chasing their approval, but standing there, watching Nick run freely for the first time in his life, I knew I did not need anything from them anymore. Financial stability returned in ways I had not expected. Between the money I had put away from Sophie's parents, the overtime I no longer needed to kill myself for, and the burden of medical expenses finally lifted from my shoulders, I was able to breathe again. I was no longer living paycheck to paycheck, no longer sacrificing every moment of rest just to scrape by. For the first time in years, I felt like I could plan for the future without the constant fear that everything could come crashing down at any second. But more than that, for the first time in my life, I felt peace. The people who had betrayed me were no longer part of my life. The ones who had underestimated me, who had taken from me, who had thought I would never recover, were gone. I had no room left for them, no space in my heart for their apologies, no desire to reopen doors that had already been slammed shut. I had fought my battle, and I had won. Nick was healthy. I was free. And for the first time, the life ahead of us was ours to live without fear, without struggle, without the weight of the past dragging us down. The war was over, and we had finally won. Life has a way of balancing the scales, and in the end, karma made sure everyone received exactly what they deserved. Sophie, once so arrogant, once so certain that she was untouchable, now spends her days working behind the counter at a Starbucks. The same woman who used to brag about how she was going to be a doctor, how she was smarter than everyone else, how she was destined for success, now forced to take orders and clean tables just to make ends meet. Her reputation is ruined, her future in medicine destroyed, and no matter how much she tries to pretend she is still the same person she used to be, everyone who once admired her now sees her for exactly what she is, a fraud, a thief, and a woman who threw away everything for a fleeting moment of luxury. Laura, once the golden child, once the sister who had everything handed to her without consequence, is now completely alone. Her marriage is over, her children are gone, her career is crumbling, and the friends who used to flock to her, who used to admire her perfect life, have all disappeared. The respect she once commanded, the admiration she used to bask in, has turned to whispers and judgment, and for the first time in her life, there is no one left to protect her from the consequences of her own choices. She lives in a small apartment now, a far cry from the life of comfort she once had, clinging to the remnants of a career that will never be what it once was, forced to watch as the world moves on without her. I do not know if she thinks about me, if she regrets what she did, if she lies awake at night replaying every choice that led her here, but it does not matter. I have no space left in my life for her, no desire to hear her apologies, no reason to look back at the past she destroyed with her own hands. She made her decisions, and now she has to live with them, just as I once had to live with the choices she forced upon me. As for me and Nick, we are building something new, something better, something free from the toxicity that once surrounded us. I no longer spend my days exhausted, no longer live in fear of what the future might bring, no longer carry the crushing weight of uncertainty on my shoulders. Nick is healthy, running, playing, laughing without the constant shadow of illness looming over him, and every time I see the joy in his eyes, I know that all the pain, all the struggle, all the betrayal was worth surviving. The people who once doubted me, who once turned their backs on me, who once chose to stand by the ones who hurt me, now see the truth. Some have tried to reach out, try to make amends, but I do not need their validation anymore. I have found my peace, not in their apologies, not in their guilt, but in the simple, quiet knowledge that I won. I fought for my son. I fought for our future, and I walked away from everything that tried to break me, not just whole, but stronger than I ever was before. Karma has put everything exactly where it belongs. Sophie and Laura are living with the consequences of their choices. The people who once enabled them now see them for what they truly are, and I, the one they underestimated, the one they tried to ruin, have finally stepped into a life free of them all. Nick and I are not just surviving anymore. We are thriving, surrounded by real love, real support, and a future that belongs to us and us alone. The sun was setting outside the window, casting warm golden light across the living room as Nick sat beside me on the couch, his legs tucked under him, his eyes full of curiosity. It had been weeks since the surgery, weeks of recovery, of small victories, of watching him grow stronger with each passing day. Every time he ran without stopping, every time he laughed without clutching his chest, every time he played like any other child, I felt a kind of happiness I had never known before. He turned to me, resting his head against my arm, his voice soft but full of the innocence only a child could have. Is my heart healthy now forever? The question made my breath catch for a moment, not because I doubted the answer, but because it was the first time I realized how deeply he had carried the weight of his illness, how much he had understood, even when I had tried to protect him from it. I looked at him, at the little boy who had fought so hard just to have the chance to live normally, and I smiled as I brushed my fingers through his hair. Yes, I said, my voice steady and sure. Your heart is healthy now forever. He grinned, as if that simple confirmation was all he needed. And just like that, he turned his attention back to his drawings, humming a song under his breath, unbothered, unburdened, truly free for the first time in his life. I watched him, and in that quiet moment, I felt something inside me shift. For so long, I had been fighting, surviving, pushing forward with everything I had, carrying wounds that had never been allowed to heal. I had spent years proving myself, standing alone, learning the hard way that the people I once trusted were never truly on my side. I had thought that once Nick was safe, once I had secured his future, everything would suddenly feel different, that the past would stop weighing on me. But it was not an instant transformation. It was gradual. I had spent so long thinking that my heart was broken beyond repair, that after everything I had endured, after every betrayal, after every loss, I would never truly feel whole again. But as I sat there, watching my son, hearing his laughter fill the room, seeing the strength in his small frame, I realized that my heart was healing too. It had been slow, quiet, almost unnoticeable at first, but it was happening. The past no longer had power over me. The people who had hurt me were gone, lost in the ruins of their own choices, while I had built something better, something real, something unbreakable. I was not just surviving anymore. I was living. So that is my story. After everything I went through, after the betrayals, after losing what I thought was family, after fighting for my son's life with everything I had, I finally found peace. I do not regret the choices I made, and I do not wish for things to have happened any differently, because in the end, I won. But now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven them, or would you have walked away like I did? Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to rebuild your life from the ground up? Let me know, because I know I am not the only one who has had to fight for what is right.